Silence swallowed the intersection at 11 o'clock at night. The kind of silence that comes only to downtown San Francisco when the fog rolls thick and the streetlights blur into halos of amber. A 9-year-old boy in a jacket 2 sizes too small moved through the traffic like a ghost, like something that had already stopped breathing. His name was Marcus. He had dark circles under his eyes that belonged on a man twice his age. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. His wrists bore bruises shaped like adult fingerprints. He stepped into the street without looking. A horn screamed. Metal and velocity approached like a hammer swinging at his small frame. Nora Morgan did not think. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She dropped the plastic bag of cleaning supplies she carried, sprinted into the intersection with her worn shoes slapping against cold asphalt, and grabbed the boy by his shoulders. She pulled him backward, hard, toward the sidewalk. The car missed him by feet. By inches. By the space between a child's life and the nothing that waits beyond. They fell together on the concrete. Her hand scraped raw. His small body shaking like a trapped animal. She knelt down immediately, her breathing ragged and sharp. She checked his face, his arms, the places where a 9-year-old should be whole. When her fingers found those fingerprints on his wrists, she went still. "My father will kill me if I go back," the boy whispered. Not a fear. A statement of fact. A mathematics problem he had already solved. Nora looked up. 5 black SUVs had stopped in the middle of the intersection. Their engines idled, patient and expensive. Windows tinted so dark you could not see inside. The third vehicle was different. Longer. A wheelchair-accessible ramp built into its architecture. The precision of unlimited money. The rear door opened. A man sat in a custom wheelchair of brushed steel and dark leather. Aleandro Caruso. 6 feet 2 inches tall, but the wheelchair made height irrelevant. What mattered was his face. Sharp cheekbones. Eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning. A scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw like a blade had cut through him once and left its mark forever. He wore a suit of charcoal gray wool that cost more than Nora had earned in 8 months. His wrists were adorned with a gold watch that could have paid her rent for 2 years. His lieutenant, Enzo, stepped out of the second vehicle. Mid-40s. Muscular. Hand already moving toward the inside of his jacket. His fingers stopping just short of his gun. Nora did not know who these men were. She did not know that the wheelchair was custom-built by Italian craftsmen who took 8 weeks to construct it. She did not know that Aleandro Caruso controlled every illegal operation from Chinatown to the docks, that his word was law, that men trembled when he entered rooms. She only knew that a child was broken and bleeding, and that something inside her would not let him go. She wrapped her arms around Marcus and pulled him closer. Aleandro's eyes locked onto the scene. A woman. Thin. Worn. Shoeless in everything except courage. A coat held together by patches and hope. Dark hair pulled back with a rubber band. And around a traumatized boy, her arms were fierce. Protective. Without hesitation. Without calculation. He had not seen anyone move like that in 15 years. He raised one hand. Just one. A gesture so small that most people would have missed it. Enzo froze. His hand withdrew from his jacket. The 5 black SUVs remained idling but did not advance. They simply waited, like patient predators that had learned the value of stillness. Aleandro rolled his wheelchair forward, toward the edge of the open door. Toward the woman and the child on the sidewalk. The ramp descended with mechanical precision. But what neither of them knew in that moment was that Aleandro Caruso had been left at the altar 102 days earlier. The cathedral had been the city's most exclusive, its ceiling painted with saints and cherubs. 400 guests had filled the pews. Senators. Business leaders. Crime families from 6 different territories, all there to witness the wedding that would unite the Caruso Empire with the Dawson fortune. Rachel Dawson had walked down the aisle that day in a dress that cost $200,000. Her blonde hair pinned with diamonds. Her smile bright and calculated. She had reached the altar where Aleandro waited. She had taken his hand. And then, as the priest began speaking, she had leaned close and whispered words that had shattered something inside him. "I cannot marry a cripple," she had said. "Imagine what people would say. I have a reputation to maintain." And then she had walked backward, away from him, down the aisle. Back toward the doors. While 400 guests sat frozen in stunned silence. While photographers captured every moment. While the story spread across every news channel in California within 3 hours. Cripple. That was the word she had chosen. Since that moment, Aleandro had been watching the streets. Looking for something real in a city built on performance and lies. Looking for someone who moved without thinking, who protected without measuring the cost. Now he sat in his wheelchair on a fog-drenched street at 11 o'clock at night, and he was watching a woman hold a broken boy like he mattered. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and solid like an oath. "What is your name?" Nora did not look away from Marcus. Her hand stayed on the back of his head, keeping him close. "Nora," she said. "Nora Morgan." "And the child?" "Marcus." Aleandro nodded once. "Get in the vehicle, Nora Morgan. Bring Marcus. We are going to St. Mary's Hospital, and we are going to make sure that no one ever puts marks like that on a child's wrists again." Enzo stepped forward to open the side door of the main SUV. Franco, the second lieutenant, emerged from the lead vehicle. Both men moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to obeying without question. Nora hesitated. Every instinct she had developed through years of survival, years of learning that help always came with a price, screamed at her to run. To take Marcus and disappear into the fog. But Marcus was bleeding. Marcus was shaking. And sometimes survival means recognizing the moment when someone throws you a rope instead of a noose. She picked him up and walked toward the open door. Enzo helped her into the vehicle without touching her, a gesture of respect she had never been shown before. The leather seats were warm. The air inside smelled like expensive cologne and metal. Aleandro's wheelchair was secured into a specialized mount. He sat at an angle that allowed him to see her, to see Marcus, to see everything. "Hospital," Aleandro said. Not to Nora. To someone else. A driver. A man whose name she would learn later was Antonio. The vehicle moved. Smooth. Silent. 40,000 pounds of steel and velocity, gliding through the fog like it owned the streets. Which, in many ways, it did. Nora held Marcus against her chest. His small fingers gripped her coat. His breathing began to slow. He was safe. For now, he was safe, and that was a kind of miracle that Nora had stopped believing in years ago. At the hospital, doors opened before they approached them. Nurses appeared. A doctor who moved with urgent purpose. X-rays were taken without a single question about payment. Aleandro sat in his wheelchair and watched the doctor's work, and when he caught the attending physician's eye, a small nod passed between them. A communication that required no words. When the doctor had finished his examination, he turned to Nora and spoke in careful, measured tones. "The child has suffered trauma. Physical and psychological. He will need care. Consistent care. Professional intervention. I will pay for everything," Nora said. Not a question. A statement of how things had to be. "There is no payment necessary," Aleandro said from across the room. "I will pay for everything. His treatment. His recovery. His future." Nora's eyes found his. "Why?" Aleandro did not answer immediately. His fingers moved across the armrest of his wheelchair, touching the smooth metal as though drawing strength from it. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, more careful. Because some people see a child suffering and they calculate the cost of helping. They measure the risk. They look for an exit strategy. He paused. You did not do any of those things. You simply moved. You simply protected. And I have learned that people like that are rare. Rarer than anything else in this city. He turned away then, toward the window where the fog pressed against the glass like something trying to get in. My lieutenant will arrange everything. You will stay with Marcus. You will not leave his side until he is stable. And when he is, we will talk about what happens next. Nora wanted to ask more questions. She wanted to understand why a man like this, so clearly powerful, so clearly accustomed to command, would stop his convoy for a child he did not know. But Marcus was already reaching for her hand, and that was enough. That was everything. Outside the hospital, Aleandro's phone buzzed. A text message. He read it once and then set the phone aside without responding. 3 months earlier. That was where this story had to begin if anyone was ever going to understand how a mafia boss could be broken by public humiliation and then remade by the simplest act of human kindness. 3 months earlier, in a cathedral filled with light and lies. The Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul stood on the highest hill in San Francisco, its white marble glowing in the afternoon sun like something waiting to ascend toward heaven. Inside, the light fell through stained glass windows in patterns of emerald and sapphire and crimson. 400 guests had filed into the pews. In the back of the cathedral, behind a closed wooden door, Aleandro Caruso stood in front of a mirror and adjusted his cufflinks for the 14th time. His suit was Bryony, tailored in Milan over 8 weeks. His shoes were leather so soft it felt like touching air. His boutonniere was a single white rose that had been flown in from Florence that morning. He was not nervous. Aleandro Caruso did not experience nervousness. What he experienced was calculation. Precision. The sense that everything was moving according to plan. Behind him, Enzo and Franco checked their weapons one final time before securing them beneath their jackets. A ceremony was still a ceremony, but a ceremony involving the Caruso family required precautions. She is here, Franco said quietly. The bride has arrived. Aleandro nodded. He did not turn from the mirror. He did not allow his face to show anything except what he intended to show, calm. Certainty. The confidence of a man who had built an empire on the understanding that power is simply the will to maintain control when chaos descends. What he did not say was that he had not seen Rachel Dawson in 3 weeks. What he did not say was that his Lieutenant Marco had reported strange meetings, late-night phone calls, whispered conversations that ended when Aleandro entered a room. What he did not say was that something cold and dangerous had been stirring in his chest since the morning Rachel had postponed their wedding twice, then rescheduled it, then moved the entire ceremony to a different cathedral. The organ music began. A sound so loud and ancient it seemed to shake the marble beneath his feet. The small door opened. A priest in white vestments gestured for him to proceed toward the altar. Aleandro turned from the mirror. He did not think about anything except the mechanics of movement. The coordination required. The strength in his arms and core that allowed him to move through the world without the assistance most people assumed was necessary. The chair had been built specifically for him. Every inch of it had been designed to enhance power rather than diminish it. He rolled down the aisle. The guests turned in their pews. Senators. CEOs. Men who ran shipping empires. Women draped in jewelry that cost more than houses. All of them watching. All of them assessing. All of them wondering if the Caruso-Dawson marriage would hold, if it would shatter, if it would reshape the entire balance of power in San Francisco. The aisle was long. Impossibly long. Aleandro's wheels moved silently across the marble. Each rotation bringing him closer to the altar. Closer to Rachel. There she stood. Blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that had required 6 hours of work. A dress of white silk and French lace that had taken a team of seamstresses 8 weeks to create. A smile bright and perfect as a weapon. She walked toward him. When she reached him, she took his hand. Her fingers were cold. He noted this fact without interpretation. Cold hands, he had learned, often meant nothing except that the body was cold. He did not know yet that cold hands could also mean that someone's heart was not pumping blood toward their extremities because their heart was not engaged with the moment at all. The priest began to speak. Ancient words in Latin that had been spoken over marriages for 1,000 years. Words about unity and fidelity and the binding together of two lives into one. Rachel leaned close. So close that only Aleandro could hear her words. So close that the cameras capturing the moment from the back of the cathedral could not pick up sound. "I cannot marry a cripple," she whispered. "Imagine what people would say. I have a reputation to maintain." The words landed like bullets. Aleandro's face did not change. His grip on her hand did not loosen. But inside his chest, something shifted. Something broke. Not slowly, the way fractures usually spread. All at once. Completely. Rachel withdrew her hand from his. She turned. She walked backward down the aisle, her dress trailing behind her, her heels clicking against marble in a rhythm that would later be captured on video and shared across 3 million social media platforms within 24 hours. 400 guests sat in stunned silence. The priest looked at Aleandro. His mouth opened. No words came. Aleandro remained exactly as he was. Sitting in his wheelchair at the altar of the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul, watching the woman he had intended to marry walk away from him in front of every powerful person in San Francisco. That was 102 days ago. Since then, Aleandro had instructed his men to watch the streets. To find something real. Something uncalculated. Something that still believed in people despite the evidence that belief was a luxury reserved for the naive. And then, on an ordinary night in November, when the fog was thick and the city was quiet, he had found it. A woman with worn shoes and a coat held together by patches. A woman who did not know his name. A woman who had seen a child suffering and had simply run toward him. 3 months before that night on the highway, Aleandro Caruso sat at the altar of the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul with his hands folded in his lap, waiting for a woman who would never arrive. The cathedral was a fortress of marble and stained glass, its vaulted ceiling rising like a prayer into shadow. 400 guests filled the pews, politicians with calculating eyes, business owners whose fortunes were built on questionable foundations, family members dressed in black silk and pearls. The organ swelled, filling the stone chamber with sound that echoed off the walls like 1,000 whispered secrets. Aleandro wore a black tuxedo tailored to accommodate his wheelchair, the seams precise, the fabric moving like water. A white rose boutonniere sat pinned to his chest. His dark hair was swept back from a face scarred from the temple to the cheekbone, the kind of scar that suggested violence survived and memory carried. His eyes were storm gray, the color of a winter sky before thunder. He did not move. He did not fidget. He simply waited, his hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair, each finger adorned with a silver ring that caught the light from the stained glass windows. Enzo and Franco stood beside him in matching suits. They had worked for Aleandro Caruso for 15 years each. In that time, they had seen him negotiate with men who owned city blocks. They had watched him command loyalty from hundreds. They had never seen him nervous. But they saw it now in the slight tension along his jawline, the way his left hand pressed harder against the armrest. The bride did not appear. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. The whispers began in the back rows, spreading forward like a fire-consuming dry wood. Guests shifted in their pews. Cameras clicked. Cell phones emerged. The priest looked at Aleandro with eyes full of pity, an expression Aleandro would have murdered a man for showing him. Enzo's phone buzzed. He read the message, and his face went the color of ash. He bent down, whispered into Aleandro's ear. 2 sentences. That was all it took. Aleandro's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests until his knuckles blanched white. He wheeled himself forward, toward the microphone at the altar. His movements were smooth, practiced, the movements of a man who had learned to command a room from a position society deemed powerless. The organ stopped. The cathedral fell into silence so complete you could hear the wind outside rattling the stained glass frames. His voice, when it came, was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. "There will be no wedding today. Rachel Dawson has chosen not to proceed with our union. I respect her decision. But understand this, loyalty is the only currency that matters in my world, and today the entire city learned what happens when it is absent." He turned his wheelchair. He wheeled down the aisle, back toward the doors, while 400 pairs of eyes tracked his movement. Camera phones captured every frame. News vans were already gathering outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward a sky that had turned gray and unwelcoming, as if the heavens themselves were expressing their shame. Outside the cathedral, Aleandro's men waited with 2 black SUVs idling at the curb. The engines rumbled like sleeping predators. Rain had begun to fall, cold and sharp, stinging against the skin. Enzo and Franco flanked him as he was helped into the first vehicle, the lift descending and rising with mechanical precision. Across the city, in a penthouse suite on the 42nd floor of a building that commanded views of the entire bay, Rachel Dawson stood at floor-to-ceiling windows with a champagne flute in her hand. Beside her stood Douglas Hale, a man of 63 years with salt and pepper hair combed back from a face that had learned cruelty early and never unlearned it. His suit was Armani, his watch was Rolex, his fingernails were manicured. He smelled like old money and older sins. Rachel watched the news coverage on 3 different screens. Security camera footage from the cathedral. A reporter standing outside in the rain. A split screen showing her own image walking backward down the aisle, her dress trailing behind her like a ghost surrendering to the light. "Did you see his face?" she said, and her laugh was the sound of something beautiful breaking. A cripple in a chair thinking I would actually marry him. Can you imagine? The scandal alone would have ruined me. Douglas Hale smiled, and it was not a smile that reached his eyes. It was the smile of a predator that has cornered prey. "You played it perfectly," he said. "The humiliation. The public rejection. Now he looks weak. Every organization in the city will test him. The Colombians, the Russians, the independent operators, they will smell blood in the water." What they did not know, what Rachel Dawson could never have calculated in her careful strategic mind, was that Aleandro Caruso was not weakened by humiliation. He was freed by it. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man alive, and Aleandro had just discovered he had never had anything to lose at all. The wedding had been a performance, a piece of theater meant to legitimize his empire. Now that the performance was over, the curtain was falling, and what emerged from behind it was something far darker. In the 3 months that followed, Aleandro's empire grew colder. More efficient. More ruthless. He dismantled every operation that preyed on the vulnerable with surgical precision. Traffickers disappeared from the streets. Loan sharks stopped answering their phones. Predators learned that the city had a guardian, and that guardian was a man who had learned to love nothing except the idea of protecting those who could not protect themselves. His men whispered about the change in him. "The wedding broke something," Enzo said to Franco one night as they stood in the parking garage beneath the office building that served as Aleandro's headquarters. "Something important broke." Franco shook his head. "No. I think the wedding revealed what was always there. I think she was the only thing keeping the darkness contained, and now that she is gone, there is nothing left to contain it." Neither of them was right. Neither of them was wrong. 3 blocks away, in a parking lot behind a grocery store where the lights had burned out years ago and no one bothered to replace them, Nora Morgan sat in the front seat of a 1997 Honda Civic and counted $34 into her palm. The bills were wrinkled and worn, handled so many times they felt thin as tissue paper. $34. That was everything she had left in the world. Her daughter Emma slept in the back seat, age 7, her chest rising and falling with the gentle rhythm of childhood sleep. Her son Marcus was curled against the passenger window, also sleeping, age 9 and already protective in a way that broke Nora's heart. They had been homeless for 3 days, since the eviction notice arrived at her door. 3 days of moving from parking lot to parking lot, of finding places the police would not chase them from, of rationing what little food she had managed to keep. The foreclosure notice sat crumpled in her coat pocket, the paper soft from being folded and refolded 1,000 times. It was dated 14 days ago. It stated, in legal language that felt like violence written into words, that she had $125,000 due in 3 days, or Emma's medical treatment would cease. Not just pause. Cease. Emma had a heart condition. Hyperplastic left heart syndrome. It required medication that cost $3,400 per month. Medication that kept her alive. Medication that Nora had been paying for by working 3 jobs, office building cleaner, night shift at a grocery store stocking shelves, weekend shifts at a diner where customers treated her like furniture, something that existed to serve but not to see. She had stopped eating 2 weeks ago. She told herself she was not hungry, but that was not the truth. The truth was simpler and far more brutal. The truth was that every dollar she did not spend on food was a dollar that could go toward Emma's medication. The truth was that she could survive on coffee and the leftover food customers left on plates at the diner. The truth was that a mother will starve before she lets her children starve. But even her starvation was not enough. Even 3 jobs and the surrender of her body to exhaustion was not enough. The debt had grown faster than she could pay it. The eviction notice had come like a death sentence wrapped in an envelope. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. A woman of 28 who looked 40. Eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. Hair pulled back in a braid that had begun to grey at the temples. A scar on her left cheekbone, a remnant from a time before the children, from when she had been someone else. The coat she wore had been donated by a woman at the church. The shoes came from a thrift store. The shirt underneath was her last clean one. Outside, the October wind cut through the parking lot, carrying the smell of rain coming, carrying the chill of a winter that would arrive in weeks and find her still homeless, still struggling, still counting dollars like a prisoner counts the days until freedom. What Nora Morgan did not know, as she sat in that dark parking lot counting the last $34 she had in the world, was that 6 months earlier she had made an enemy of a man named Douglas Hale. She had worked for him briefly, before she understood what he was, before she realized that the job he offered was not work but captivity. She had stolen a client's car and disappeared into the city with both children. She had vanished so completely that even the police could not find her. But Douglas Hale was not the police. Douglas Hale owned half the city's underground network. He owned people. He owned secrets. He owned the kind of power that did not appear in newspaper articles or business records. And he did not forget people who stole from him. He had been tracking Nora for 6 months, watching her movements, waiting for the moment when she was broken enough to be recaptured. He had convinced a woman named Rachel Dawson, wealthy and connected and motivated by her own hatred of Aleandro Caruso, to help him. Together, they had orchestrated the destruction of Nora's legitimate employment opportunities. Every job she interviewed for mysteriously fell through. Every reference Rachel knew would contact employers and whisper lies. Every path to survival had been systematically closed. They were simply waiting for Nora to become desperate enough. Simply waiting for the moment when her children's hunger would matter more than her freedom. That moment was arriving. The rain hammered against the windshield of Nora Morgan's 1997 Honda with the sound of 1,000 fists demanding entry. She sat in the driver's seat, both hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, watching the engine light pulse red like a dying heartbeat. October wind screamed through the gaps in the door frame, carrying the metallic smell of a storm that had turned vicious. The temperature gauge on the dash read 38 degrees and dropping. Behind her, Emma coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Nora's chest tighten. Her son lay against his sister, both of them wrapped in the only blanket she owned, a threadbare cotton thing that had once been blue but was now the color of old smoke. Nora turned the key again. The engine turned over twice, groaned, and died. She turned it again. Nothing but silence and the howling wind. Her fingers found the crumpled foreclosure notice on the passenger seat. She had been holding it for 3 days, reading the words over and over as if they might change meaning if she stared long enough. 30 days to vacate. The apartment was gone. Their possessions were gone. Their life, such as it was, had been systematically dismantled by a system designed to destroy people like her. She smoothed the paper flat against her thigh, though smoothing did nothing to change the mathematics of her situation. $34 remained in her wallet. $34 to feed 2 children for an unknown number of nights. $34 to somehow conjure $125,000 in 3 days for Emma's heart medication, the medication that kept her daughter alive. The surgery had been 3 years ago. The complications had been ever since. The debt was eternal. Outside the car, a vehicle passed at 70 miles per hour, creating a vacuum of wind that rocked the Honda. Rain sprayed across the windshield in sheets. Nora's thin jacket, the same jacket she wore for cleaning houses at 4 in the morning, offered no protection against the cold that was already seeping through the car's failing seals. She had no phone service. Her plan to walk to the nearest gas station dissolved into the reality of the October darkness. This stretch of Highway 101 was isolated, industrial, empty except for the occasional truck that roared past without slowing. She looked back at her children. Emma's lips had taken on a faint blue tint. Her son's eyes were already closing. "I'll be right back," Nora whispered, though she had no idea if this was true. "Mommy is going to find help. You stay warm under the blanket. I'll be right back." She stepped out of the car and the wind hit her like a physical force, driving the rain sideways into her face. Her shoes with holes in the soles, were soaked immediately. The asphalt was slick and treacherous. She began walking north along the shoulder, the darkness swallowing her within 50 feet of the car's taillights. Traffic sprayed water across her body with each passing vehicle. Her legs felt weak. She realized she had not eaten in 2 days. Yesterday she had given her portion of rice to both children. The day before, the same. Her body was running on fumes and desperation, 2 things she had plenty of. Half a mile north, her vision began to blur. The wind seemed to have hands, pushing her toward the highway itself, toward the red taillights approaching in the darkness. She stumbled, dropped to her knees on the gravel shoulder, coughing violently. The cold air scraped her lungs raw. For a moment she remained there, on her knees, rain running down her face, and she thought about simply staying. About lying down in the rain and letting exhaustion take her. Emma would go to Douglas Hale's people. Her son would go to the state. And Nora would simply stop fighting. It would be so easy to stop. Headlights appeared in the distance. For vehicles, moving in formation, slowing as they approached her position. Black SUVs with tinted windows. The kind of vehicles that did not belong on this highway at 3 in the morning. The kind of vehicles that belong to people with power. Nora tried to stand, to move away, but her legs would not obey. She remained on her knees as the convoy pulled to the shoulder and stopped. The passenger door of the second vehicle opened. A man emerged wearing a charcoal suit and a long black coat. His name was Enzo. He was 38 years old and had spent the last 15 years as the right hand of Aleandro Caruso. He had killed 7 men in defense of his employer's interests. He had never, in all that time, been surprised. But he was surprised now. He opened an umbrella, black, expensive, the handle polished silver, and stepped toward the woman on the ground. As he drew closer, the headlights caught her face. One eye was swollen completely shut, a mass of purple and black tissue that had begun to yellow at the edges. Handprint bruises wrapped around her throat in the shape of fingers, the specific shape of violence. Her lip was split, dry blood caked on her chin. She was soaked through, shaking so violently her teeth chattered audibly. Enzo's hand moved instinctively toward the weapon beneath his coat. He called back toward the lead vehicle, "Boss. We have a situation." The driver's side door of the second SUV opened and a man in a wheelchair rolled forward into the rain. Aleandro Caruso was a striking man, tall, even-seated, broad-shouldered, with dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples. His suit was tailored to perfection, cut to accommodate his specific anatomy. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, a souvenir from childhood. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. His watch was 18-karat gold. His expression, as he looked at Nora, revealed nothing except a complete absence of emotion. The rain soaked his suit immediately. "Bring her," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Boss," Enzo began, "we don't know." "Now." Enzo lifted Nora carefully, one arm beneath her knees, one arm supporting her shoulders. She tried to pull away, her voice barely a whisper, "My children. My car is back there. Both my children." Aleandro was already speaking into his phone before she finished the sentence. "Franco. 2 miles south, 1997 Honda, disabled on the shoulder. 2 children inside. Bring them. Keep them warm." "Understood, boss," Franco's voice crackled back. Nora was placed in the heated vehicle, in the back seat beside Aleandro's wheelchair. She hugged herself, her entire body convulsing with cold and shock. Aleandro removed his own coat, the charcoal wool that had been tailored in Milan and cost more than Nora made in a year, and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at the touch but did not pull away. "You are safe now," Aleandro said, his voice steady and measured. "No one will hurt you again. What is your name?" "Nora," she whispered. "Nora Morgan." Meanwhile, 3 blocks away in a warehouse basement that reeked of mold and old concrete, Douglas Hale sat at a desk surrounded by stacks of documents and a laptop displaying security footage. He was 52 years old, with the soft body of a man who exercised power through intimidation rather than physical strength. His hands were small, soft, manicured. But the violence he controlled was absolute. He had a network of 17 properties. He had ownership stakes in 3 nightclubs. He had connections to 14 police officers, 3 city council members, and 1 federal judge. He owned 43 women, some voluntarily, most through methods that would never withstand scrutiny. He had been searching for Nora Morgan for 6 months. One of his lieutenants entered, breathing hard. "We located her. Highway 101 South, about 40 minutes ago. But she's not alone." "Who's with her?" "Aleandro Caruso's people. We saw 3 SUVs. They took her." Hale's face darkened. He set down his phone slowly, deliberately. "Call every man we have. Find out everything about her contact with Caruso. And locate Emma Morgan. I want that child within 12 hours. If Caruso wants to protect Nora, then he needs to understand the cost." At precisely the same moment, in a ballroom across the city, Rachel Dawson stood beneath crystal chandeliers wearing a gown that cost $40,000. She was 47 years old but looked younger through the aggressive application of cosmetic procedures. Her hair was blonde, her smile practiced, her charity fundraiser raising $3 million for at-risk women in San Francisco. The irony was so complete, so perfectly structured, that it almost seemed artistic. She was shaking hands with the mayor when her phone buzzed. A text from Douglas Hale: "Caruso is protecting Nora Morgan." Everything just changed. She excused herself, walked to a private bathroom, and texted back, "Caruso is weakening. The humiliation at the wedding has made him reckless. Let me use this." By 4 in the morning, Nora sat across from Aleandro in a private booth at Bella Not, an upscale Italian restaurant in North Beach that never closed its doors to him. The restaurant was technically closed, but the owner had arrived within 10 minutes of Enzo's phone call. The booth was burgundy leather, the lighting soft and warm, candlelight reflecting off wine glasses that held only water. On a cushioned bench nearby, Emma and her son slept under a pile of clean blankets, finally warm, finally safe, though safety, Nora was beginning to understand, was a concept she could barely recognize. Enzo had brought soup, minestrone with vegetables that had actually been chopped that day, and bread, still warm from the kitchen's morning preparation. Nora lifted the spoon with shaking hands. The soup tasted like something from another life, a life before the foreclosure notice, before the counting of dollars, before Douglas Hale had walked into her hospital and offered her $5,000 to transport a patient. She finished the entire bowl before she spoke. "Why are you helping me?" Her voice was hoarse, damaged by the grip that had left those handprints. "I'm nobody. You don't know me. I have nothing to offer you." Aleandro watched her in silence for a long moment. Outside the restaurant, San Francisco was beginning to wake, the sky was lightening to charcoal gray, the rain had gentled to a drizzle. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of something long buried. "When I was 9 years old," Aleandro said, "my father broke 3 of my ribs because I spilled his drink. The glass shattered on marble. The whiskey soaked into his shirt. He broke the ribs because my mother had the audacity to scream while he did it. And do you know what everyone did? Nothing. The neighbors heard. The police were never called. My teachers saw the bruises. No one asked questions. So I swore to myself that if I ever had the power to stop that, if I ever had the resources to make sure a child never suffered like that again, I would do it." Nora's hands trembled. Tears began to fall before she could stop them. "I don't have money to pay you back," she said. "I owe $125,000 in 3 days for Emma's heart medication, and I have $34. $34. She laughed bitterly, a sound like breaking glass. $34 to save my daughter's life. Aleandro leaned forward slightly, his wheelchair adjusted automatically with a soft mechanical hum. "Tell me who did this to your face. Not the money. Not the circumstances. Tell me who put his hands around your throat." Nora's hand moved to her swollen eye. She hesitated, and in that hesitation was the weight of 3 years of silence, of running, of hiding. Then the dam broke. She told him everything. How she had been a nurse, working nights at St. Mary's Hospital. How Douglas Hale had approached her offering $5,000 to help transport a patient, money she desperately needed because Emma's surgery was scheduled and the hospital needed payment up front. How she had arrived at a warehouse basement instead of a medical facility. How she had realized, with the clarity of absolute horror, that the patients were women. Trafficked women. Brutalized women. Women Hale owned. She told him how she had tried to leave and Hale had shown her photographs, Emma at school, taken from across the street. Her son at soccer practice. Hale's voice, "You belong to me now. And if you try to leave, I'll take the children." For 2 years, Nora had provided medical care to women she could not save. She had cleaned wounds inflicted by men in suits. She had set broken bones. She had held terrified hands and made promises she could not keep. Then one night a client had left his car keys on a bathroom counter. She had grabbed Emma, her son, stolen the vehicle, and driven for 6 hours in any direction that was away. "I thought I was safe," Nora whispered. "I changed our names. I found work. I was saving money. I was going to get Emma's surgery paid off, and then we were going to disappear completely. But 2 weeks ago, he found me." She showed Aleandro the bruises on her throat, still purple in the shape of specific fingers. "He cornered me in the stockroom at the grocery store where I was working. He said I had cost him $200,000 when I stole that car, when I stole the women from his operation. He said I was going to work off my debt, or he was taking Emma." This, she pointed to her swollen eye, her split lip, this was his reminder that he was serious. Enzo, standing at a discreet distance near the entrance, went absolutely rigid. Marco, who had just arrived with fresh blankets for the children, exchanged a look with Enzo that neither man had made in 15 years. In their entire tenure working for Aleandro Caruso, they had never seen him sit beside anyone injured like this. Never seen him listen this way, his full attention focused on a stranger's devastation. "There is a woman," Nora continued, her voice barely audible. "Rachel Dawson. She is Hale's partner. She is wealthy, connected, and she runs the social side of the operation. She finds desperate women, women like me, women with nothing to lose, and offers them jobs. And then she hands them to Hale. But what makes it worse is that she blacklisted me. Every legitimate job I've gotten in the past 3 years, I've been fired within a week. She calls employers. She spreads lies. She makes sure I stay so desperate that I'm easy to recapture. Aleandro's hands tightened on his wheelchair armrests. His knuckles turned white, a small crack in his composure, barely visible, but visible. When he spoke, his voice had become something different. Not cruel. Not yet. But cold in a way that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. Rachel Dawson did not just humiliate me in front of 1,000 people at my own wedding 3 months ago, he said quietly. She has been feeding women to a predator while pretending to be a philanthropist. While raising money for at-risk women. While smiling for photographs. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke into his phone, his voice brisk and functional. My personal account. Wire $125,000 to St. Mary's Hospital, Emma Morgan's surgical account. Do it now. And call my FBI contact. I want a full federal investigation opened on Douglas Hale's entire operation. Every property, every account, every transaction. Already done, boss, his attorney said. Then another call, Franco. I want every property Hale owns. Every warehouse, every safe house, every facility. I want it mapped by sunrise. Full inventory. Ownership documents. Every name associated with the operation. Move. Nora shook her head, tears streaming now. I can't accept that. The money. Why would you? Because what happened to you was not justice. It was predation dressed up as circumstance. And because you protected a child in the rain without knowing who I was. You were willing to freeze to death rather than let your children suffer. That courage is worth more than money could ever quantify. Emma stirred in her sleep, her small body shifting under the blankets. She opened her eyes slowly, disoriented, confused. She saw her mother crying and her child's mind made the immediate connection that all children make. Something was wrong. She struggled to her feet and Nora pulled her close, holding her daughter against her chest. We're okay, baby, Nora whispered into Emma's hair. We're okay. We're finally okay. But what Nora could not know, as she held her daughter and felt Aleandro's quiet presence like a shield between her and the world, was that the storm they had fled into was only the beginning. That Douglas Hale was at that very moment calling every man in his network. That Rachel Dawson was already calculating how to distance herself from the coming disaster. That Aleandro Caruso, humiliated, betrayed, and now awakened to a purpose beyond power, was about to dismantle two people's entire empires before the sun rose again over San Francisco. What Nora could not know was that sometimes rescue arrives not as salvation but as the beginning of a different kind of reckoning. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger. Nora Morgan stood motionless at 9:22 in the evening, her eyes fixed on the yellow-green bruising that now mapped her left cheekbone like a fading continent. The handprint bruises around her throat had begun to dissolve into shadow, but when she swallowed, she still felt the phantom pressure of Douglas Hale's fingers. Rain tapped against the window behind her in a rhythm like a countdown. She held a kitchen knife in her right hand, and her fingers trembled so violently the blade caught the fluorescent light in fractured patterns. The safe apartment that Aleandro had provided sat silent around her. Emma slept 2 rooms away, her medication refilled, her small body finally relaxed without fear for the first time in 6 months. Marcus, at 9 years old, had stopped asking why they couldn't afford heat. Now he slept deeply, the way children sleep when danger has temporarily retreated. And Nora stood in this bathroom holding a knife and contemplating an ending. This will never stop, she thought. Men like Hale never surrender. Even if Aleandro destroys him tonight, tomorrow another man will arrive with the same hunger, the same cruelty, the same conviction that she belonged to him. Emma will never be safe. Not really. Not as long as I exist to be hunted. She raised the knife. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped it. Then Emma laughed. It was a small sound, barely audible through the walls, but it cut through Nora's thoughts like a blade. Pure joy. Something Emma had not felt in months. Her daughter was playing with her brother in the other room, and that tiny sound of happiness stopped everything. The knife lowered. Nora's breath fogged the mirror. She set the blade down on the porcelain sink and pressed her palms against her face. No. Not like this. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called the number Aleandro had given her. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting. Nora. Are you safe? He called me, she whispered. Douglas. He said if I don't meet him at the warehouse on Pier 39 at 10 o'clock tonight, alone, he'll send men to Emma's school tomorrow. He said he owns half the police force. He said. Listen to me. Aleandro's voice was calm, absolute, like thunder wrapped in silk. You will not go to that warehouse. I will handle this. He'll take her. If you move against him, he will never touch your daughter again. I give you my word, and in my world, a word is worth more than 1,000 contracts. Trust me. Nora closed her eyes. She thought of the rain that night on the highway, how this man's men had pulled her from the storm. How he had held her while she sobbed. How he had looked at Emma and Marco with something in his eyes that looked like recognition, like he understood loss in a language only the truly broken could speak. I trust you, Nora said. The line went silent except for the sound of rain outside the window. At 10:02 in the evening, Aleandro Caruso stood in the operations center of his penthouse, 42 stories above San Francisco's rain-soaked streets. The war room smelled like strong coffee and printed paper. Enzo and Franco stood on either side of a table covered in building schematics, aerial photographs, and financial documents. 12 men in tactical black stood at attention along the walls, their movements economical, their expressions carved from stone. Douglas Hale operates a human trafficking network that spans for states, Aleandro said, his voice filling the room like a presence. 12 women have died in his custody. The federal government has been investigating him for 6 months but lacked the evidence to prosecute. We are going to provide that evidence. Franco spread photographs across the table in careful rows. The warehouse on Pier 39. Hale's penthouse overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. His safe deposit boxes. His servers. His network of corrupt officials arranged like a spider's web, each connection marked in red ink. Hale will be at the warehouse in 30 minutes, expecting Nora Morgan to appear alone, Aleandro continued. What he will find instead is FBI agent Torres and a tactical team surrounding the building from 4 sides. Our men will provide support. We extract evidence, we eliminate the immediate threat, and we dismantle his operation systematically. Enzo leaned forward. Rachel Dawson? She is at her annual charity gala at the Fairmont Hotel. 200 guests. Agent Torres has a warrant for her arrest. She will be taken into custody at 10:30 on stage, in front of every news camera in the city. Her empire of lies will become her coffin. Franco nodded slowly. And the others in the network. 18 arrests are happening simultaneously across the state. Warehouses. Safe houses. Financial institutions. By morning, Douglas Hale's entire operation will exist only in federal evidence lockers. Aleandro paused. No one dies tonight. Death is too quick, too easy, too merciful. Hale goes to prison. He survives long enough to understand what he has lost. The warehouse on Pier 39 smelled like salt water and rust. Douglas Hale stood in the center of the empty space, his men positioned around him like pieces on a board. He was 48 years old but moved like a man who had already died and refused to acknowledge it. His face was scarred from childhood violence, his eyes the color of drowned things. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Nora's entire year of rent, and he checked his watch repeatedly. At 10:15, the first door exploded inward. 12 men in tactical black moved through the warehouse like ghosts made manifest. No sirens. No announcement. Just sudden violence and professional precision. FBI agents in body armor descended from the catwalks above. The warehouse flooded with light and force and the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. Douglas Hale spun toward the nearest exit. His hand reached for the pistol at his hip. He never made contact. 3 federal agents tackled him before his fingers closed around the grip. His men surrendered immediately, hands raised, the fight draining from their bodies the moment they understood the odds. Agent Torres, a woman in her 50s with gray threading her black hair, kneeled beside Hale as he was pressed against the concrete floor. "Douglas Hale," Torres said, her voice steady and mechanical, "you are under arrest for human trafficking across state lines, racketeering, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and conspiracy to commit assault." She continued reading his rights slowly, each word a nail in a coffin. "You are looking at a 40-year federal prison sentence with no possibility of parole." Hale's face went white. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Then, "No. You can't. I have immunity." "I have?" "You have nothing," Torres said. "Evidence recovered from your servers includes financial transactions documenting 12 trafficking networks across 4 states. Communications with 23 co-conspirators. Video evidence. Testimony from 9 survivors. You are done, Mr. Hale. The question now is simply how many decades you spend in federal prison." Hale began to shake. His body convulsed against the concrete floor like a man having a seizure. Tears ran down his face. He looked, in that moment, like a cornered animal understanding that the trap had finally sprung. 3 blocks away, Franco and Enzo led a team into Hale's penthouse apartment. The space was obscene, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, furniture that had been individually commissioned, art on the walls that had been stolen from museums. They moved through the rooms methodically. Hard drives extracted from a hidden safe. Documents photographed. For $1,700,000 counted and catalogued. Every transaction. Every victim. Every name. At the Fairmorn Hotel, the ballroom shimmered with chandelier light and the quiet violence of wealth on display. Rachel Dawson stood on stage in a dress that cost $12,000, a diamond necklace worth $85,000 more catching the light like a small star at her throat. 200 guests in formal wear applauded as she delivered her speech about women's empowerment, about her foundation's work, about the transformation of vulnerable lives. She smiled, radiant and untouchable. Agent Torres walked onto the stage at 10:28 in the evening. The applause faltered. Confusion rippled through the ballroom. Rachel's smile froze. "Rachel Dawson," Torres said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, money laundering, racketeering, and fraud." Rachel's mouth opened. "This is insane. I am a philanthropist. I help women." "You identified vulnerable women and delivered them to Douglas Hale's trafficking operation," Torres said. She turned Rachel around, and the click of handcuffs echoed through the ballroom. "We have emails. Financial transfers. Recorded phone calls. You are looking at 40 years federal prison minimum." Rachel screamed, "Do you know who I am? My family will destroy you. This is a mistake." The ballroom erupted. Camera phones rose like weapons. Flashes exploded. Rachel was led off stage in handcuffs, her mascara running, her carefully constructed image collapsing in real time as millions watched the footage spread across news channels within 20 minutes. Nora sat on the edge of the couch in the safe apartment, Emma asleep against her shoulder, her small body warm and trusting. The television glowed with headlines. Her hands trembled as she watched Rachel Dawson being led away in handcuffs. She watched Douglas Hale's face, drained and destroyed, as he was loaded into a federal vehicle. Within 1 hour, 500,000 people had shared the footage online. By morning, 2 million. By the end of the week, every news outlet in the country had run the story. Her phone rang. Aleandro's voice came through the speaker, calm and certain. "It is over," he said. "They will never touch you or Emma again." "How did you—" Nora couldn't finish. Federal evidence. 40-year sentences for both. 18 arrests across the state. His entire network is being dismantled as we speak. Nora lowered her phone. She looked at her daughter sleeping against her, This child who had finally stopped looking over her shoulder. Who had finally stopped being afraid. "Thank you," Nora whispered, but the words felt too small, too inadequate, like trying to measure an ocean with a teaspoon. What she did not know, in that moment, was that this was only the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. 1 year later, the October wind carries the smell of rain across San Francisco, and Nora Morgan stands at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse on the 30th floor. The city spreads below her like a circuit board of light, buildings glittering against the darkening sky, cables of traffic threading through downtown streets. She wears a tailored navy dress that cost more than her entire wardrobe from a year ago. Her hair is styled with professional precision. Her posture holds something that was not there before, the confidence of a woman who survived and chose to live anyway. From the next room, Emma's laughter rises like a bell. Her son's voice joins in. Both children are attending private school now, eating warm meals 3 times a day, sleeping in bedrooms where the heat actually works. The apartment is warm. There is food in the refrigerator. There are no eviction notices pinned to the door. She hears the penthouse door open behind her. Soft sound of the wheelchair rolling across marble. The door closes quietly. Enzo is leaving them alone, the way he always does now. "I didn't know you were coming tonight," Nora says, not turning from the window. Aleandro Caruso wheels himself to the window beside her. He is 39 years old but carries the weight of someone much older, someone who has seen violence reshape itself across decades. His dark suit costs $17,000. His watch costs more than her childhood home was worth. But it is his eyes that have changed in the years since Rachel left him at that altar. They are softer now, less like weapons, more like someone learning what mercy feels like. "I needed to tell you something I should have said a year ago," he says. His voice is deep, like thunder rolling across a distance. Nora turns. She can read the weight in his words. "What is it?" Aleandro does not look at her immediately. He keeps his eyes on the skyline, on the city that bends to his will, the empire he has spent 20 years building. "When Rachel left me at that altar in front of 400 people, I thought it was the worst moment of my life. The entire city watched me sit in my wheelchair, alone, humiliated. I believed I would never trust anyone again." The rain begins to fall outside, gentle against the glass. "Then I met you," Aleandro continues. "You protected a child you did not even know, in the middle of traffic, without thinking about consequences. You survived hell and still chose kindness. You rebuilt yourself when the world tried to break you into pieces. You are everything Rachel pretended to be, and nothing she actually was." Nora's breath catches. Her eyes fill with tears, but she does not look away. "I am a man in a wheelchair who runs an empire built on fear and loyalty," Aleandro says. "I have nothing to offer you that resembles a normal life. But I need you to know that you changed me. Not the wedding. Not the humiliation. You changed me." He turns to look at her now, and she sees it, the rare thing, the impossible thing. Vulnerability in the eyes of the most powerful man in this city. "You reminded me why I do this work," he says. "Not for power. Not to control. But to protect people who deserve better than the world gave them." Nora steps closer to him. The rain accelerates outside, drumming against the window. "You saved my daughter's life. You destroyed the man who tortured me for years. You gave me a future when I had none. Normal life does not interest me anymore." She gestures between them, at the space where 2 broken people found each other. "This does." Aleandro's hand moves to her face, asking permission with the gentleness of a man learning how to be tender. She leans into his palm, and he feels the warmth there, the reality of her skin against his hand. "I spent a year watching you rebuild yourself because I did not want to complicate your life while you were healing," he says. "But now..." Nora kneels in front of his wheelchair, eye level with him, her hands on his arms. "Now you tell me the truth. That you feel this too." "Every day," he says. "Since the moment I found you broken down on that highway in the rain." "Some people are worth breaking every rules for," Nora whispers. Redemption is not a destination. It is the choice to love fiercely when the world tells you it is impossible. They kiss, slow and certain, the October wind rattling the window, the city glittering below them like a prayer answered. 6 months later, they sit together at Bellanotte, the Italian restaurant where they first spoke a year and a half ago. The same private booth. Emma and her brother sit with them, healthy and laughing, their cheeks flushed with joy. Enzo and Franco stand nearby in their dark suits, smiling, something they rarely do, something that happens only when they witness their boss being happy. On the table between them, framed in simple glass, is the crumpled foreclosure notice. Yellow and worn, the edges soft from being held too many times, from being carried through rain and cold and desperation. Nora's voice rises like a bell in the quiet restaurant. They say miracles do not happen to people like me. Single mothers with $34 and bruises on their throats. Women running from monsters who own half the city. But I learned something the night Aleandro Caruso found me broken down on that highway. Miracles are not about deserving them. They are about someone choosing to act when the world expects them to look away. She picks up the foreclosure notice, holds it to the light. Douglas Hale is in federal prison. 43 years. Protective custody because even criminals despise traffickers. Rachel Dawson received 41 years. Her fortune seized to compensate victims. Her name is now synonymous with betrayal. Aleandro's hand finds hers across the table. The wedding where she abandoned Aleandro became the beginning of her end, not his. Nora continues. He could have chosen revenge. He could have become the monster people expected. Instead, he chose to protect. He chose me. He chose Emma. He chose to turn his pain into purpose. She places the foreclosure notice back on the table, between the candle and the wine. I keep this to remember that $34 and a broken-down car on a freezing highway were not the end of my story. They were the beginning. The restaurant falls silent except for the sound of water glasses being refilled, the gentle clink of silverware. 3 blocks away, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new clinic happens at sunrise. Nora and Aleandro stand together in the morning light, his wheelchair beside her, their hands intertwined. Emma holds oversized scissors in both hands, her face bright with purpose. Behind them, the building rises 5 stories, painted in warm cream and blue. On the entrance, a bronze plaque reads, "The Caruso Morgan Foundation for Trafficking Survivors." Photographers snap pictures. News cameras roll. But Nora does not see any of it. She sees only her daughter, finally safe. Her son, sleeping peacefully. A man who chose love over revenge. A life built not on money or power, but on the radical choice to rebuild when destruction seems inevitable. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. Not from wealth or privilege or beauty masquerading as charity. Miracles come from a woman who stood in the cold with $34 in her palm and refused to disappear. Miracles come from a man in a wheelchair who understood that true power is not the ability to destroy, but the courage to protect those the world tried to break. If this story moved your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe because tomorrow we bring you another story of justice, redemption, and love that breaks every rule. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.